Nothing in this podcast is intended to render legal, financial, medical, or other professional information. Because the details of your situation are fact-dependent, we highly encourage you to find a recommended individual that you can trust to give you the expertise that you need related to your situation. Well, good morning or good evening, Docpreneur Nation. You're listening to Concierge Medicine Today's Docpreneur Leadership Podcast. And today we have a special guest. They're all special, of course. We have Danielle Ambrozy, and she is working in the field of finance and accounting for doctors. And she's a principal at Rehmann. And we're going to talk with her about some of the most common challenges and most common questions that physicians are asking her about finance and accounting and running your practice well. She works with primarily private practices from anywhere from just solo independent physicians upwards of large groups. And so, Danielle, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me today.
So I have 3 kids, and my daughter's 16 and she wants to be a teacher, but and my wife is a teacher too. And at no point has she ever come home and said, Dad, Mom, when I'm an adult, I want to work with 8th grade, science. Like that's really, and I want to work with a bunch of 14-year-olds who talk back to me all the time and are always on their phones. I'm sure when you were growing up, you were like, I think I want to work in finance and accounting, specifically with independent practices. I don't know if that's ever a childhood dream of a young girl. Maybe it was yours and you were always geeky about math, but how did you move into healthcare? What drew your interest into the math side? Because my wife is a math teacher, so I get the love for that. But what drew you into healthcare and specifically finance?
So it's kind of a funny story. I started my childhood, my high school, even college as pre-med. I wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to be a pediatrician specifically. I loved children. I loved being around kids. So that was my dream kind of growing up. I said, I'm going to go to med school. I'm going to be a doctor. I'm going to be a pediatrician. I went to orientation. They went through this core syllabus, kind of everything I would have to do. And then I thought, do I really want to be a doctor? Is that something that I'm passionate about? Or did I think it sounded good and I love kids and I didn't know that was really my true path. So I had taken some accounting classes in high school and I loved our accounting teacher. He was very passionate about the teaching. It came easy to me. I thought it was a good kind of career path. So I switched from pre-med to accounting. So I always laugh that I couldn't be a doctor, but I can work with doctors. So that's kind of how I ended up in healthcare, was kind of by accident after joining Rehmann, and there was some availability in the healthcare field and I got some experience and really liked it. But I'd always joke that I wanted to be a doctor, but then I went to accounting. So now I just work with doctors.
Well, and the neat part about your role in their lives and their businesses, and I'm a big advocate for keeping doctors, running good businesses. That's what we focus a lot of our content and conversations about. And because, we need more doctors continuing their practices, right? Like so many of them went out of business over the last few years, and now they're quickly sending us, as their patients bills because, they're having it. The insurance companies are dragging their feet, getting reimbursements out, and the reimbursements are even shrinking. But you see measurable results in like you can move a number and add a 0 or add another 3 to a number, and it's measurable for them. They see the value in it. And so I think that some of the work you do is so important for them because it keeps their business running, and we have to keep their businesses running because we don't want to lose them in our communities, and we're losing too many. So do you find that's the case, that you're making some of those measurable results? It's like, hey, it's more tangible. Like I really kind of love this work that I get to do.
Yeah, I would absolutely say that. I think a lot of what we do is able to help kind of make those strategic decisions and kind of look at the data and say, here's the numbers, here's where you're at, here's where you can get to, here's where, you might be struggling in some area, but if you make these small tweaks or you make these small changes, you can get to here. So a lot of what we do is trying to be proactive instead of reactive. So let's look at your information, make sure it's clean, up to date, real time, so that you can make those strategic decisions to stay on top of those challenges. Because like you mentioned, all physicians are dealing with insurance reimbursements being cut. inflation, cost rising, and that's, not a win-win situation. You've got income coming down, but expenses going up. And how do you navigate that? How do you make sure that you're able to stay on top of it? If you don't have the good data and the good information that's accurate and up to date, you can't make those decisions to stay ahead of that.
Well, tell us a little bit about what Rehmann is doing, and it's Rehmann. We'll put the links in the show notes to Raymond and what you guys are doing and how to connect with you and your team over there in the show notes below when this is live. But tell us a little bit about Raymond and what your organization does that makes it unique.
So we are a fully integrated professional advisory firm. And it's kind of a mouthful, and we go back and forth of how to kind of explain to the world who we are and what we do. But really, what we do is we have so many service offerings for our clients that's comprehensive and all in one place. So we have wealth advisory, retirement planning, traditional CPA tax preparation, um, outsourced accounting. So we can be the full back office for our clients if they need that, if they're having staffing issues and need some help in the accounting department of their practice, managed IT, cybersecurity. That's what makes us unique, is that we have so many different service lines that we can offer and bring to our clients at one place. So you don't have to tell your story to 20 different vendors or people. You have one place where we know your story, we know your needs, we can help you and be there, be your partner and be there with you for all of those service needs.
Hmm. Well, I'm going to ask a couple of questions that kind of came up as you were talking there, and I think that a good leader leads his organization or his or her organization well, right? And one of the things that not so great leaders do is they sometimes ignore the numbers. They ignore what's happening because they don't want to admit that, hey, I'm struggling, or you know, these areas of the practice I'm just not comfortable with. They're not my strength. What are some of the challenges that you see that in working with practices that are like every single day we have to address these challenges in, I would say, 7 to 8 out of every 10 of the groups that we work with? What are they doing that they need to be doing better, that you are always saying, whew, we got to figure this out every day?
Yeah, I think you kind of said it perfectly where you said they don't focus on it because it's not what they're comfortable with and it's kind of outside of the scope of what they do. So they kind of set it aside and they put almost blinders on a little bit. So IT, cybersecurity, making sure all the processes and procedures are in the right place. There's so much out there right now with cybersecurity and hacks, and you don't want your name in the paper for that. You don't want to be known for being hacked or having your system breached. But a lot of times it's the unknown and it's scary and it's not your typical, wheelhouse. So you kind of set it aside and think, it won't happen to me. I'm small. I don't need to deal with this. You kind of set it aside and hope that you don't ever have to deal with it. But being proactive and staying on top of that sets you apart because you can plan for it and prepare for it and know that you've tested your systems and you're prepared. So I would say cybersecurity, the people that we work with on a daily basis, we make sure that their financial house is in order. So their accounting systems are up to date, their processes and procedures are accurate and up to date, or if they need tweaking, that we're tweaking them with them so that everyone's kind of on the same page. So I'd say just making sure that your financial house is in order, that you have the right team in place, you have the right people on your bus and in the right seat of the bus to make sure that you're proactively addressing those issues so that you don't run into those challenges that some practices do when they turn a blind eye to things that they might feel uncomfortable with, or they're busy running a practice, they're busy seeing patients, they're busy with their documentation and their notes. The finances sometimes come last, when really if you have the right people in place, they can happen alongside of you while you do what you do best and practice medicine. Your financial house is being taken care of on the other side.
Yeah, I think it was even Clark Howard and a number of ads that we all hear on the radio. If we listen to the ads and we don't skip over them, or we're not paying that portion of it, is that, cybersecurity, threats impact small businesses. And, if you're listening and you're a medical office with, a limited number of employees, you're probably considered a small business. And I think the scammers out there and those who, would take advantage of your assets, see small businesses as an opportunity to go in and threaten your assets, threaten your livelihood, threaten your business because you don't have great security. Is that something that you can resource or help with at Rehmann?
Yes, absolutely. That is something that we do at Raymond. We have a cybersecurity team that's all they focus on. And
Wow.
to add to that, even if you're not directly hacked, there are systems, or there was just last week a clearinghouse for a lot of medical providers that was hacked, and they've been shut down for over a week. So physicians are trying to figure out, how do I get my claims out? How do I make sure that my revenue cycle continues because of this hack that I couldn't control because it happened to a vendor that I use, but how do I respond to that? And does that mean that if they were hacked, then I'm at risk, or I'm, susceptible to something too? So it might not be you directly, but it could be people that you're working with or contracting with. So making sure that, you have those backup systems in place for what happens if someone I work with is hacked, and how do I kind of pivot to make sure our cash flow doesn't stop?
And it's interesting, we hear a lot about the primary care and physician shortage and more, rural shortages and all these different things. But when you look at the numbers, there is, do you find that the trend is, for the practices that you work with, do you find that, okay, the we wish it would be an up and down hockey stick, right? Like, nothing's ever going to be a direct hockey stick when you look at the charts, right? For numbers and growth of your businesses. It's always up and down, but hopefully it's continuing to go up, right? In the steady trend. Do you find that when year after year, your experiences over the years in working with doctors, do you find that maybe the hockey stick is kind of inverted? It's going down and down and down. That would give them, it's like, you know what? The specialties are doing well, and the primary care and family medicine practices are the ones that are routinely, an inverted hockey stick.
I think even the specialties are starting to feel it and feeling the insurance reimbursements. And, those practices that are still on the right side of that hockey stick, they're working harder. They're doing ancillary services. They're adding more different, they're getting creative to bring in that revenue, but they can't do the same thing and make the same amount of money anymore. That just doesn't work with the way the insurances are cutting and the reimbursements are getting lower. It's getting harder and harder to keep that hockey stick the right direction, like you said, even for the specialties.
Do you find that some of your clients or some of the doctors that you're talking to each week, they're trying new things? I mean, besides, like, we see a lot of aesthetics, a lot of lifestyle medicine, integrative services being offered, but now there's, in the last 10 to 20 years, there's subscription-based healthcare delivery services. Do you find that that some are exploring these, or are, for the most part, let's say, the majority of the clients you're working with are just kind of business as usual? This is how we've always done it. Insurance reimbursements, bill the patient, collect the copays.
I'd say that most of them are trying to find different avenues, different revenue streams, different ways to kind of flip that narrative so that they are growing and bringing on new services, new ancillaries, things like that. But yeah, some obviously are on the other side and they're not. And that really depends on kind of where they're at in their practice and their lifestyle too. We see some of what practices now are doing is they're starting to have conversations with private equity. So they're
Hmm.
trying to look at, if they're nearing maybe retirement, or they're looking at succession planning, how do I get out? What's my exit strategy? So now they're talking to private equity and getting into those conversations as a way to add some dollars to their bottom line, or to kind of gear up for succession planning. So we're seeing that a lot right now as well.
Now, when we think about positions and private equity, sometimes it's a very positive thing for patients. It's a very positive things for some doctors. And then there's the other side that sits at the back of the room and crosses their arms and says, well, that's not right. Like, that's not going to keep us in control as far as physicians are concerned. You know, how do physicians feel about private equity in healthcare? What kind of common FAQs or challenges or topics or conversations are you having at dinner related to that?
Yeah, I think we see both sides of it. Just like you said, you see the ones that have a very positive experience and they go down that path and it's worked out and they're happy and everybody is in a good rhythm and they're good with it. And then sometimes we have practices that they meet with the companies, they have the discussions, and then they walk away and they decide it's not for us. So it's definitely not for everyone. I think it is a great solution and opportunity for some, but you have to do your due diligence. You have to really know who you're signing the deals with, what the deal entails, what all the ins and outs are ahead of time before you make any big decisions. But I think, like you said, it works for both. It works for some, it doesn't work for some, and a lot of people are just having the conversations. They might not necessarily go down the path or continue, but they're at least they're entertaining the discussions.
Well, our guest today is Danielle Ambrozy. She's principal at Rehmann, and it is a finance and accounting solutions firm. And we'll put the links in the show notes of how to connect with Danielle and see if there's a good fit for you and your needs in your practice for finance and accounting. And this is not an advertorial. We're not getting paid as a sponsor for this. We think that this is just valuable education, valuable resource to equip physicians. And if you've listened to this podcast for a long time, you know that we're big fans of saying, look, it is no longer about being the best doctor for the world anymore. It is no longer about being the best doctor in the world anymore. It's about being the best doctor for the world, for your patients. And I would even say for your team and for your practice. And finance and accounting is so important. We cannot afford to lose another doctor's office in our local community to bad business, decisions. And so Danielle and her team can help you make some wise finance and accounting decisions. And speaking of wise decisions, typically when a physician is deciding whether or not they need help, they're talking about it with their spouse, they're hemming and hawing over it on the commute and thinking, I really could use somebody in this area. I'm not good at this, but you know, somebody in my practice, she's pretty good. She, even though she does a lot of phone calls and she works with the insurance reimbursements and, she calls, I could probably add one more thing to her plate to help me manage the practice. And that's typically a lot of small businesses will do stuff like that, especially small medical offices. But then you're faced with like, okay, should I use somebody who's internal? So should I use somebody I already pay for? And just add one more thing to their plate and kind of like hope for good results? Or should I look at an external consultant? So I may be defining internal and external consultants maybe differently than you want to describe, but I think that it's important that we consider external help because the physicians that you go to go get business advice got the same amount of credit hours usually that you did. And if you're always asking your peers, like, hey, what do you do on this side? That's helpful, but sometimes that's not always beneficial. So it's important to have internal and external resources available to you, especially when it concerns your finances and your accounting for your business. Talk to us a little bit about the struggle that physicians have in utilizing somebody they already pay for or, saying, I think it's time to make a change and we can help you.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's a hybrid. Sometimes you have that person internally that has grown up in your practice, has worked for you for a long time. They've taken on some more responsibility. They're doing a little bit of the management, but they don't know what they don't know. And they don't know maybe sometimes when to ask for help or when they might be overwhelmed or have, you know, things come up that they're not sure how to deal with. So that's when the external help is helpful, having that partnership. So it's not always one or the other. Sometimes it's both. Sometimes you need both of those people to kind of help guide that internal person, give them feedback, kind of give them a resource to go to ask those questions. Or sometimes it is you have a long-term internal person in your practice that might be retiring or might be leaving. And that's when it's helpful to look to external sources to say, okay, I had this person for so long. I trusted them. They've worked for me forever. They're leaving. What do I do? How do I bring in someone completely new that doesn't know the practice, doesn't know anything? That's sometimes where we see the best fit for the external help because we can shadow alongside that person. We can get to know them and what they're doing and maybe offer recommendations to kind of maybe change things up a little bit or make things a little bit better. And then retention. I mean, for all clients, dealing with retention is very hard, making sure that you have those long-term people. When you use an outside party, that becomes their headache. You don't have to worry about every time someone leaves, retraining them, getting them up to speed. That's on someone else. So you always know that, if that person goes on vacation, they have someone else to step in. If you're a small practice and your person goes on vacation, you might not have anyone to step in. So it's kind of alleviating some of those struggles and those pain points by having someone external. But sometimes it's not a one or the other, sometimes it's both.
Mm. Well, let's talk a little bit about inflation and those areas of inflation. You kind of brought a little bit of it up, and that is related to staffing. And of course, the one of the two or three most, expensive things for any physician these days, if you're a small business owner, is your lease, where you're at, your brick and mortar. Sometimes it's your equipment, unless you own the building. But then there's also staffing, and you want to make sure that your numbers are your house is in order, like you said. And staffing is, people are going to ask for raises, and you want to be able to give it to them if they've done a good job. Where are the areas of inflation that you're challenged with in, saying, yeah, your costs are going to go up in this area, or do you help project some of those for next year and say you need to budget enough, or hey, we need to have a tough conversation because really you got a lot of expenses over here that might be, you could slim some of those down.
Yeah, so speaking on the staffing specifically first, that's a conversation we have, I think, with every single client, every single meeting. It's always brought up is what do I do about my staff? We're giving raises, we're, paying more. It's compounding. So if you have the same person in a role for 20 years, which is great because you have long-term employees, all of a sudden you give them a raise every year, every couple of years, they've outpaced their job description. So how do you manage that? And so a lot of times what we're seeing people do now is, they're setting some pay scales of this is your role, this is kind of your pay scale. Once you get to the top of that, we might not be able to give raises as often or ever, but we might reward you with a bonus or looking at different ways to compensate that is not compounding on their annual wage because all of a sudden you've got, a medical assistant making 3 times what they would make if you hired a new one. And it's a hard balance because you want to reward those long-term employees and you want to make sure they're fairly compensated. But there comes a balance of when are they out of their pay range and how do you navigate that? Sometimes with bonuses, with other, additional paid time off, things like that. So looking at creative ways to kind of curb that is probably in every discussion we have with our clients right now. As far as other costs, we're always looking at ways to have a health review. So when's the last time you looked at your retirement plan cost? When's the last time you looked at maybe your merchant services? Some fees and some costs, there's really nothing you can do about them. But sometimes it's as simple as kind of, let's look at what we're paying. Let's look at where we've been, where we're going. And maybe there is a solution or an alternative option out there. It's not in every case, but sometimes there are. So doing some kind of plan health reviews and checkups into the retirement plan, looking at maybe some of the vendors and suppliers, those are things that we're typically doing on a regular basis.
Wow. Well, our guest today is Danielle Ambrozy. She's a principal at Rehmann. And tell us a little bit about where we can find you. I know that it's Rehmann, REHMANN.com. But how would I plug in? What's the first kind of what is an introductory consultation, or what does my first call to you guys look like?
Yeah, so absolutely. You mentioned our spelling and our website. That's really our first place to go. We have a healthcare page on our website that has a box where you can put your information in and we'll contact you and have some initial discussions. You can find us on LinkedIn as well. I have a personal LinkedIn as well as the company. But really it's that intro box of putting your information in, we'll contact you and have an initial discussion just to see kind of where you're at, what your needs are, and how we can help.
Wow. Well, our guest today is Danielle Ambrozy, and she's with Rehmann, and we'll put the links of Rehmann and how to connect with Danielle and her team. All right, so our next question is kind of coming in for a landing here with Danielle, and that is, who and where does Raymond and your team work? Are you just in a particular state, or do you have to have licenses to work in other states? Is there a primary geography of physicians that you're looking for that could reach out and connect with you guys?
So we work all over the United States, but our office locations are primarily based in Michigan, Ohio, and Florida. So our main offices are in Michigan, and then we have offices in Ohio and Florida as well. But we can work anywhere in the United States. We don't have to be licensed in that state. So we do have clients in most states.
Well, our final few questions for you, these are called our lightning round of questions. And these are pretty easy questions. We ask them of all of our guests. And, um, you can be however brief or long-winded as you'd like to on this. But when you first bump into a new physician or a new group, what's the book or podcast that you're like, I wish every doctor that we work with and team would read this or listen to this or be aware of this type of content? What's maybe a book that you would recommend to new clients or to current and existing clients?
It's a great question. So really what I would say is kind of going to our website, looking at the thought leadership we have out there, our blogs, our podcasts. We try to get, some of those hot topics that are out there that are meaningful and important to our physicians and our groups. So you can find a lot of information out on our website.
Podcasts are so helpful these days. And I find that, I listen to less and less music. I listen to more and more podcasts because it's just so hyper specific on content that you're interested in. And so what kind of topics do you guys talk about on those?
So really anything that is currently impacting our clients. So we have some on tax law changes, Secure Act 2.0. We have podcasts on staffing. When during COVID, we had a lot of podcasts on different programs that were out there. So really anything current and that our clients are asking questions. If we have a lot of questions that are being asked of us, we try to put them in a podcast or an article so that we can address them for all of our clients.
Well, I wish I could back us up into, 5 minutes ago. And that is, let's say we had a conversation with a doctor who's, suddenly had a physician leaving. And the notice the time window is very short. How important is it that the physician or team that's still remaining in place in that practice contact, your group and have a conversation with you all to say, whoa, we just had an employment change and we got to come up with some money. Like like how do we make this offer work for a new doctor? Or, what do those conversations look like?
So those conversations happen all the time, but the most important thing is if you have the right team in place, you've already made those agreements, you've already had those processes and procedures kind of set out for you. So you have your buy-sell agreements, you have your legal documents in place. So you already are kind of proactively aware of what you need to do when it happens. It's just making sure you pull the right triggers, like, hey, we need to do X, Y, and Z when that happens. So I think the biggest thing is being proactive and making sure that you have the plan in place before you have to deal with anything like that so that you're not scrambling and struggling and like, oh, wait, we did not expect this to happen. What do we do now? But you already have your plan, you have your documents, everything. Because the worst thing is that when someone leaves, if they're leaving unhappy or there's some, disgruntledness or some, hostility, you already have the documents stated. So you can say, hey, we've already agreed to this in happier times. This is what we're doing. So
Mm.
kind of being proactive is the most important piece.
I love that. Plan and prepare. That's so important. And, there will always be tension in any business, right? There's always going to be, you're always going to have to navigate, those items every now and then, even when things seem really, really rosy. But, we'll always bump into speed bumps and potholes in the road. All right. Last couple of questions. Maybe the last book you read. We have a book list here at Concierge Medicine today, and we recommend pleasure reading because sometimes doctors got to take a day off too, and they need stuff on their nightstand or stuff to put on their Kindle. What's maybe one of the last books that you read?
So I am a mom of two kids under 2.5, and I'm pregnant with my third. So my reading is few and far between these days. But the last thing I read was a Dale Carnegie book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And anyone that knows Dale Carnegie knows that they're great books to read. So I would recommend any of his books. But that was the most recent one. But I'll
That
find
is
time in future life for the reading.
Well, I wish I was more of a reader, but I'm
Mhm.
much more of a listener, and I find that I'm really digging into a lot more Audible books. So I don't know whoever came up with the idea to do Audible books, not like the ones you put the disc in anymore, the tape
Right.
in, but the ones that we can all relate to on our phones. And our last two questions for you is. Um, leaving a legacy and leaving a lasting legacy, in your space. I'm of the persuasion, I keep referencing every podcast the Steve Jobs quote where he said make a dent in the universe. And healthcare is super complicated. Finance and accounting is super complicated. These are all complex problems. But yet we stick with it. We stay in our lane for a little while, wherever we are, whoever we might be working for, and we try to make a dent in the universe. And you're making a dent in finance and accounting by helping so many doctors run their practices and their business better. And my hope is that, you and I are both making better business people out of these medical, folks that, they will leave a lasting impact on their community by staying in business for years and years to come. So my question is, we ask this of all of our interviews, is what do you want to be known for?
So that's a great question. And I think at the root of it, I want to be known for someone that helped, for someone that made a difference, for someone that made an impact. I don't ever want to be known as a vendor, a service provider. Anyone can do a tax return, anyone can do a financial statement. But I really want, in the business world, for those clients that I work with, those people I interact with, to say, she helped me. She was a partner with me. She was there for me. It's day to day, it's not always about getting the financial statement done. It's about the bigger strategic decisions, those life decisions, those, hey, something big's happening. I want to call Danielle. I want to make sure she's the first person I talk to. And she helped me and she made a difference. That's really what I want to be known for.
Well, thank you for that. And, I'm sure from your seat on the bus that a lot of those conversations are not all always happy. It's putting out little fires, it's maybe putting out some big fires, maybe it's problem solving. And that's not an easy seat to sit in. It can be very uncomfortable because, they're looking to try and afford things, they're short on resources, and so thank you for your role. Our final question is if you were to, you know, hand in your keys and say, you know what, that last client, and we ask this of everybody, and it's usually the same answer. Well, which story or testimonial do I choose? Because there's just so many. But if you something to go home happy about and sit at the dinner table with your spouse and kids and say, you'll never believe what happened. Like I could retire now and be happy with the dent that I've made. What's one story that comes to mind for you?
Ooh, it's another good question. So for me, I think the story would be working with a physician that was about to basically shut down. They were dealing with a lot of debt. They were dealing with just tough times. They didn't know where to turn. They didn't know how to get out of it. They couldn't see the forest through the trees. They were just at a point where they were like, I'm done. And just being able to kind of say, no, no, it's okay. We'll hold your hand through it. We'll get it cleaned up. We'll get everything kind of in order. And now seeing after that, a couple years later, they're thriving. They've got, they've consolidated their debt. They're able to make their payments. They're able to pay themselves, their staff, and they are just in a totally different headspace. That is like what brings us joy and pride, is being able to know that we were there through the tough times and now we get to see it on the other side.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for your time today. And I have, I have you touched on something, making sure they can pay their bills. And before we leave, I think it'd be, irresponsible to not talk about the medical debt of physicians when they graduate. They've got all this debt. How big of a, how big of a concern is this for them when they're running their practice? Are they able to set some aside? Are you helping them navigate that bill as well? Because those are significant bills that, can be around for several years.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's overwhelming when they get out of school and they're buried in that student loan debt and they're trying to figure out, can I buy a practice? Can I afford to, go out on my own with this massive amount of medical debt? And they can do it, and we can help them, and we can help do a financial plan and look at how do you do it all? How do you pay for a practice and pay your medical debt? But it's overwhelming. And in the beginning of coming out, it sometimes seems like it'll never happen and you'll never pay it off. But I'm sitting at the table with a client last week who next year her debt is paid off and she's like, I cannot believe I'm at this point. So that's also another really exciting time where you see them, they bought into a practice, they've been paying for it, and all of a sudden now they've paid off the practice purchase, they've paid off their student loans, their life is going to change drastically. So being there alongside them while they do that, it's really rewarding.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much for all that you and your team do there at Raymond. We'll put the links of how to connect with Danielle Ambrozy. She's with Raymond. You can go to rehmann.com. We'll also put the links in the show notes, as well as how to connect and contact Raymond and her team over there, but also her LinkedIn as well. And just below the description of this podcast. So thank you so much for what you do. As we say around here a lot, it is no longer about being the best doctor in the world anymore. It's about being the best doctor for the world, for your patients, and for your local community. And I'm telling you what, the finance and the accounting side of your practice matter so much. You've got to be successful in your community. You've got to be successful despite all the challenges and the impossible burden and weight that you shoulder every single day as a physician for your patients, for your staff, for those that you work around, because we can't afford to lose another doctor in our community. So you've got to connect with the right people, find out what your knowledge gaps are, and maybe it's in finance and accounting and you need some help like what Danielle and her team can provide. So again, we hope that everybody's enjoyed this. I think what we've learned today, to sum it all up, is plan your work wisely and then work your plan and work with people who understand the finance and accounting side of your practice. And Danielle and her team seem to have a pretty good strategy for doctors. Thank you so much, Danielle. We'll look forward to catching up with you soon.
Thank you for having me.